Dr. Hilgenor, right at the bottom of Daf Ayin Dalet on the base. Bamem Menakbun. What is the legal process? Dr. Gemara, Rav Amar B'mayim. You use water to clean the gas. Rabba Bar Chana Amar Be'efer. You use earth. Dr. Gemara, Rav Amar B'mayim. B'mayim v'loy Be'efer. Are you telling me that Rav holds that you need mayim by itself without efer? That's not true. And the same thing, Rabba Bar Chana Amar Be'efer. Be'efer v'loy B'mayim. That can't be pshat. Ella, pinning on to Daf Ayin Hey Amar Aleph. Rav Amar B'mayim v'hu adin la'efer. Rabba Bar Chana Amar Le'efer v'hu adin l'mayim. So then what's the machlokes? Zok Gemara v'loipli. There's talking out of machlokes. The whole question here is, do you use the water first or do you use the earth first? And it depends on what keli you're cleaning. Habra tifta. If you're cleaning a keli that has some wine in it already, some goyish wine, there's some moisture there, so then first you put in the earth to dry up and to scrub the existing wine residue, and then you use water. But habayabeshta. But if it's a dry keli, then first you put in water to add moisture, and then you put in earth. So regardless, the legal process is a two-stage process, but which stage comes first depends on the nature of what you're cleaning out. Thank you. Itmar. So now we have a little bit of a complicated machlokes, but not terribly. Itmar be'rav mishmei de Rav Amri tarti tlas. Now, there's two pshatim here in Rashi, and there's a third pshat in Tosfos. And now I'm going to learn Tosfos' pshat because it answers a lot of kashas that we had. So, Idmar be'rav mishmei de Rav Amri tarti tlas, u'shmuel omer tlas arboi. Rav says 2-3, and Shmuel says 3-4. What does that mean? So I'm going to slide down to the bottom of Tosfos. He's about 8-10 lines up in the skinny lines. Rav Omar tarti tlas. What does tarti tlas mean? It means biabeshta tarti. If it's dry schmutz that you have to clean out, then you need two stages. Mayim, afar, and that's biabeshta. So by mayim it's tarti, mayim and the afar. Berativta, if it's wet issue that you have to clean out. Plus, then you would need three stages: Efer, Mayim, Efer. So that's where you get 2-3. Ushmul Amar, it's 3-4, and that is Talas Biabeshta. You need three stages Biabeshta. Vidal Berativta. What is the extra stage? Shmuel Bala Haisif Ulafarish May Basroi Bain Berativta Bain Biabeshta. So they're not really arguing. You always need water at the end to clean it all out, to rinse it all out. Rav didn't mention that. Shmuel mentioned it. But be'etzim, they are not arguing in Allah. So let's go back. Rav Amar tarti tlas. If it's yabesha, you need mayim and an efer. You need mayim at the end to flush it all out. But Rav didn't bother mentioning it, so he called it 2 steps. But in effect, it's the same thing as the 3 steps that Shmuel says, because the mayim at the end, everybody agrees you have. The question is if it was just being counted towards the steps. And berativta ubitlas, efer mayim efer. And again, Shmuel says, I'm also going to count the mayim at the end as a 4th step. So they're saying the same halacha as to what you do, and that is, by yabeshta, you start with mayim and you end with mayim, and by retivta, you start with Efer and you end with Mayim. Everybody agrees to the same thing. The difference is by Yabeshta there's only 1 Efer treatment, and by Retivta there's 2 Efer treatments. So that is the only the difference between Yabeshta and Retivta. And both Shmuel and Rav agree to what has to be done. The question is, when you're giving the number of steps, do you include a number for the last step, the final step, which was the Mayim at the end? Rav didn't, and Shmuel did. But in Pumbedisa, they quoted the machlokes between Rav and Shmuel, which is not a machlokes, a little bit differently. They said, Rav Omar Klas Arba, Rav says Klas Arba, compares Rishon Shabbakuntris, like Rashi's first pshat, which is Klas Birativta, you need 3 steps if it's wet. Efer, mayim, efer. And the efer, mayim, efer. And therefore, even if it's moist, you need 3 stages plus the 4th of water. And b'yabeshta, you need dalit. Mayim, efer, meaning in Pumbedisa, they learned in Rav that you always need 2 stages, 2 efer stages, sai if it was wet, sai if it was dry. And Shmuel Amar Arba Chomesh, meaning Arba Berativta, V'chomesh V'yabeshta. And once again, the whole difference between Rav and Shmuel is merely if we're counting the last step of rinsing it off at the end, if we count that as a step. So Balai Zulafar Shmai Basroi B'Tavayim. V'loi Pligi Rav Shmuel. There's no machloikis between Rav and Shmuel. Bein Elishin is the surah. Sound like the first lashon. Bein Elishin the Pumbedisa. The only difference between Rav and Shmuel is if they count the last step when you do the final rinse as a step. El the Rav lechoshev ma'ay basroi, Shmuel choshev ma'ay basroi. But Zok Toshis, there is a difference between the nusach of surah and the nusach and Pumbedisa, and that is, do you need 2 efers in both cases? In surah, we learned that if it's wet, you need mayim, efer, mayim. So if it's dry, you need mayim, efer, mayim, which is 1 efer. And if it's wet, you need efer, mayim, which is 2 efers. But in Pumbedisa's nusach, regardless, you need 2 efers. Sai by Yabeshta, you need mayim, efer, and then mayim at the end. And if it's retivta, it's efer mayim. So in either case, you need 2 efers. That's the machlokes between Pumbedisa and surah. But regardless, Rav and Shmuel are only arguing whether or not we count the final step as a step, whether we enumerate the final step as a step. But Avoda, they both hold you have to rinse it off with water at the end. Okay. And so the reason why this is a little bit complicated, because if we look at the 2 pshatim in Rashi, and we understand why Rashi didn't like the first shot, and therefore he settled with the second shot. Actually, Rashi says the first shot, and then he brings the second shot, and Rashi has the kash on the second shot, and he obliges with the first shot. And then Tosfos has a kash on both shotim of Rashi, and that's why Tosfos says this shot was just the simplest shot. Zok the Heilige Gemara weiter. Idmar. Bei Rav Mishmei Rav Amar Tlas Tarti Tlas, u'Shmuel Amar Tlas Arboy. And Besura Masnahachi. This is how the Machlokes was quoted Surah. But Pumbedisa Masnu Beirav Ami Bishmei the Rav class, you need 3, 4. So either Efer Mayim Efer or Mayim Efer, but you definitely need 2 Efers. Shmuel Amar Abar Chamishi because he counts the extra step of water of rinsing it out at the end as a step. But there's no Machlokes between Rav and Shmuel in either lashon. Mark Choshev Ma'ay Basroi. Shmuel counts the final rinse as an additional step. Umar Loika Choshev Ma'ay Basroi. And Rav does not count it as a step, but Avoda you need it, so there's no argument whatsoever. Lalacha. Zok to Gemara weiter. Boy minei Rabavo. Rabavo was asked the following question: Hani gurni da'armoi mai. What is the halacha with a gurni that you bought from a goy? What is a gurni? Rashi is akolim ubalaz ripusai. What is it? It's the karchen oison svivas esatuach shloispazu anovim mikover. They pile up a whole bunch of grapes inside the press, and then they put pressure on it with the heavy board beam that comes to bear pressure down to squeeze the grapes. But the grapes are going to scatter. They're going to fall out on the side. There's no rim holding them in. So what they would do is they would take some type of wood or reed or whatever it is, rope, they would wrap it around the pile of grapes so that the pile of grapes couldn't spread and they would remain centered below the wooden beam. That's one shot. Rashi brings down the second shot from Avhai. This is something that was actually used in an olive press. And it was some type of net from netting material, similar to some people when they wash their socks, so they shouldn't get lost. They put them into a net bag, right? And then that bag would then be crushed again, pressured again, to squeeze out extra oil from the grapes. So whatever it is, it's quite absorbed with yayin nesach or oil, and oil is going during the period of time where the oil of a goy was outlawed. So hani gurni de armoy, how would you kasher them? Amar bavo tinisua. We actually have a brisa that tells us exactly how you deal with it, and all the other parts of the press. Haresh how you gitov ubespadov tameim. So we're discussing lagabi yayin nesach, but there's a similar brisa that talks about tum. So someone's gas and his beisabad were tamei. Uvikesh la soisan b'tahira, and he wanted to be metaher them. So how would you be metaher a gas that became a tamei? A press. Now the problem is that a keli you could toivel and you could make a tar, right? The slavita shas, the whole press was toiveled in the mikveh. But the problem is food, once it becomes osir, once it becomes tamei, it could never become tar again. So the question is, you'd have to make sure to get out every little bit of wine or every little bit of oil from these items that have absorbed them before you can then toivel them in a mikveh. So Zok Gemara, hadafin are the beams that put pressure on whatever it is that you're going to squeeze. The adashim Rashi says, hainu gas atzma shekarin mai. That's the base. That's the receptacle where the wine gathers. Okay. Then you have lulavin. What are lulavin? Lulavin, Rashi says, are tatisa shemachabed v'anovim hamaspasan loisvam. They have these little brushes which they would brush any grapes that fell out of the center where the pressure is. If it fell off to the side, you would brush them back in. These are all part of the tools that are used in a press. Madichon, you could merely rinse them off. They're not highly absorbent, so by rinsing them off, they'll be good. But akalim, which are grenoi, Rashi says, these are the ropes that you surround the grapes with to keep them centered. They can possibly absorb more. So it depends on what they're made out of, if they're made out of highly absorbent material or not. So if it's shal nitzorim, we shall bitzputs, which are like reeds, and bitzput is some other type of wood. Rashi says bit is canvas; it's made out of canvas. Bali tvei, they're highly absorbent, and therefore it's not just enough to rinse them off. Rather, uboy nigov be'efer umayim. It needs that two-stage process of nigov in order to extract all of the wine out of it. Vishal bitzbutz v'nagvon, vishal shiva, vishal gemi. If it's shiva gemi, which are even more absorbent, gemi I believe is like some type of rubber. So these are really soft stuff. Pier and gemi. I'm not sure what these are. Does the art scroll say what they are?
Yeah, they're plants by the water that they absorb water. They absorb water. They're like
whatever it is, they're a material that are highly absorbent, and therefore it's much more difficult to get the stuff out of them.
The rush family. There's a water side plant.
Okay. So the miyashnon yud beis chodesh. You have to let them sit for 12 months in order to get rid of all of the moisture. So basically, what we need to accomplish to get rid of the tumah is exactly the same thing we need to accomplish to get rid of the ainesa. We have to make sure there's no wine left in there, because if there's any wine left in there, it's still tamei, and if there's any wine left in there, we have a problem with the ainesa. So we've answered our question. These items that you surround the grapes with to keep them centered under the press, depending on what they're made of, either they need nigov or they need a full 12 months of being left idle. It doesn't need exactly a year. It needs a season change. Menichan migas umibad labad. Isn't that a year? Right? Every year they do it. So if you have to wait until the next year, so wouldn't you say that that's a year? Zok Gemara, no. A year means 12 months, exactly. But if we just say from season to season, well, what if last season ended late and next season ends early? There won't really be a full year. Or what if last season ended early and the next season starts later? It'll be more than a year, so it's not exactly a year. Yosy, what if you don't have patience? You can't wait till the next season. You can't wait a year. So you know what you do? If you want to bypass that and make them Torah right away, Magilon Beroischen, you either make Hagala, and that means you cook it up in a pot, and that'll extract all of the bliyos. Or another thing you could do is you could be Chayalton B'meizesim. Most of the Rishonim learn you just flush them with Meizesim. Meizesim has properties, has what we call the properties of a detergent that cleans out dirt. What's the word for it? There's a word for a detergent that breaks down dirt. I forgot what it's called, but it has properties that will break down dirt, and therefore it will break down whatever's inside the Keilim and flush them out. So Cholton b'meizesim. Now those are meizesim means the water that was used to clean zeisim. Or there's a shayla exactly what meizesim is. What does the art say meizesim is?
When they boil the olives.
So they use that water.
Facilitate extraction of the oil.
Okay, gewaltig. Zog to Gemara. Reb Shimon ben Gamliel. Mishum Reb Yosy Omer. Manichan tachas tzinor shemeimav makalchen. You have to let them sit under a steady flow of a faucet, or this means a spring that's constantly bringing in fresh water. Let them sit under there to get flushed out. Or put them into a well that has rushing water, so that it also flushes it out. V'chama oine. It says you leave them in v'chama oine. And how long do you have to leave him flushing? For the period of time that's defined as an oine, which the Gemara will explain what that is. Kederach shamur b'yayin nesach, kach amur b'tahiris. The same halacha that the Mishnah tells us, like nesach, as far as how you clean out these components, that would be the same halacha by tahiris. Frek the Gemara klapelaya. We just explained in a brisa what you do by tahiris. So if anything, you should say the same thing that we identified. You have to do for tahiris. You can apply that to yayin nesach. Klapelaya, but tahiris kaminon. Ella, what the brisa should say is kederach shamur b'tahiris. The same way this brisa just clarified exactly what you have to do to get rid of all the old wine and the old oil. To be matayirit, kach amr b'yayin nesach, that would be the exact same process. So now we have our answer as to how you deal with those ropes that you wrap around the mulch. Kama oina. So we said you'd have to let them sit in a running spring for an oina. How long is an oina? It means either a day or a night. Rab Chana She'ina said, but Amrullah Rab Chana Bar She'ina said, Amar Rabbi Rab Chana Amar B'Yechanan, it's a chatzi yom and chatzi layla, half a day and half a night, which is exactly 12 hours. Amar Shmuel Bar Yitzchak V'lai Pligi. It's not a machloikis if you say chatzi yom and chatzi layla, or you say yom and layla. Why? Habit kuvas nisan v'tishrei. In Nisan and Tishrei, where the day is 12 hours and the night is 12 hours, that's when that's what he was referring to. That's what the B'chir Bar Abba Amar was referring to when he said Oyoy Moy Laila. And when we had Shmuel Yitzchak, we had Rabbi B'chir Chatzi and Chatzi Laila, that was what Ketubas Tamas and Teves, where you either have a very long day or you have a very long night. So there, 12 hours would be half of a day of half of a night. But the bottom line is the Oina is 12 hours. Gavalt. Rabbi Yehuda. Hani Ravki Darmoi. If you have Ravki Darmoi, the Mazi, so Zokt Rashi, what are Ravki Darmoi? Zokt Rashi, Ravki Mishmeres. It's some type of filter. Kamoi Sakin Shenoitno Ben Shmorim Lahoitzeseyim. They would have these sacks that they would fill Shmorim in, and then it would allow the wine, the residual wine left in the shmorim to drain out, but the shmorim would be held in. So depending on what they're made out of, they would have different levels of absorbency. So the mazi, if it's made out of shalsar adam, if it's made out of human hair, this filter, madichan, you could merely rinse them off. Human hair will not absorb much. The amrav, it's made out of like a wool. Minagvan, you have to do the two-stage niguv process. The kisna, if it's made out of flax, which are highly absorbent, then miyashnon, you have to let them stay for a long time till they dry out. Okay, Zoktigamar, the Ika Kitri, if there's any knots in these ropes, knots don't let anything out. So Shari Lahu, you'd have to open up any knots to release anything. Now there's a Shaila if the knots are only applying to Kisna Miyashnon, or if Kitri, the knot, if you have to open up the knots for all three steps, that's a Shaila in the Rishon. Hani the Kuli, the Chalasa, Zokt Rashi. Chalasa is Keveris Shel Shavatim Shemashana Banyain. So now we're talking about if they're made out of kuli and chalasa, the armoi. So let's see what Rashi says. So the kitri are I'm sorry, the kuli are ropes. The chalasa, the kuli, the chalasa, the armoi of goyim. The chiti, if they're made out of wheat, bechavli, the tsuri, and there's certain ropes of tsuri. So how do you take care of these items? So what does he say? These are types of baskets that are made out of these types of ropes. The kuli, the chalasad armoi. So what do they say? They're baskets.
These are types of wicker baskets used for straightening the line.
Okay, so Hani the kuli the chalas darmoi the chiti. I think it means if it's made out of chiti. Is that what it means? The chiti is hay. Let's see what he says about it.
Palm fibers.
Oh, so the chiti the bechavl the two. So what is it? What is the chiti? The chaiti. Oh, the chaiti. Oh, so the chaiti, if they're sewn, oh. So these are baskets. So the reeds themselves, we're not worried about their being absorbent. We're worried about the ropes that are used to tie the basket, to stitch the basket together. So therefore, the chiti, if they're tied, bechavle, the tsuri, if they're tied with ropes of tsure dekel, that are made out of some type of fibers that they get out of a dekel, madicham, they can just be rinsed because those ropes don't absorb too much. However, the tzavsa, if they're the ropes that they tie the reeds of the basket together are made out of tzavsa, then minagvam, then it will require that two-stage cleansing process with afer. And the kisna, if it's made out of flax, which are even more absorbent, miyashnon, you have to let them sit for 12 months. And once again, if there's any knots there, you have to open them up because otherwise the wine in them will not drain out. So Tochis has a discussion as to whether or not, if you have a beggar like a tablecloth, will washing it kashering? Can you wash out a tablecloth that's milchiks and use it for fleishiks? Can you wash out a tablecloth that a giant esachan? Can you use it? Can you wash out a tablecloth that's chamatik and use it for Pesach? So look what Tosha says. The kisna miyashin amar tam the mapois v'sadinim shalonu. Any towels or napkins or tablecloths that we use shesharu b'yayin nesach that absorb yayin nesach ein tzorich liyashim. You don't have to let them sit for 12 months. Midaloi kamar kol klei pishtam stam. It only says these ropes for baskets that are made of pishtam. But it's mashma a regular bag of pishtam wouldn't require the miyashnon. Elahani Keilim shemonu chachamim shoyibekin dafke bivliyosu. The only things that need 12 months, that need miyashnon, are only these items specifically listed, not a regular tablecloth. You don't have to worry, even if it's a hot isser that fell on the tablecloth, and the tablecloth could have absorbed the isser. Hakoil yesh lahater v'kibois klisheni. If you wash it out in a warm water, that's not even a klivisha, but a klisheni, which is what our washing machines are, that would make it mutter. Vada yadua shayde kibus godel shachayvkin kama v'kama pomim. When they would wash things, they would bat it with something. Our washing machines probably have the same effect. Therefore, for sure, it would be mutter. Then Rashi says, maybe it depends on how much the stain holds and how difficult it's to get it out. But Pashas of Toys washing any beged should surely allow it to become mutter. Zoktamar Vater. Itmar we learned. Amma Oretz Shahoshit Yodoy Lekas. And the Amma Oretz Rashi tells us Chazal were geyser upon him that he's Tomei. It's not right. But Chazal were geyser on the Amma Oretz that he's never Tomei. And he stuck in that into the gas, the Nogabesh Koilis. So what you have over here in the gas is there were piles of clusters, different piles that were separated from each other. And he touched one pile of clusters. Question is, what's going to be? It's matama that touched it, but will it be matama the other piles of grapes in that same gas? So Rebbe v'Rabchia, there's a machlokes between Rebbe and Rabchia. Chadamer eshkol l'chol tzevivosav tamein. The eshkol in the immediate area around it is tamein, and there's some moisture. It's not flooded with wine, but there's a little bit of moisture. But the chol gas kula tahira. It doesn't answer all of the eshkolis in the gas. It just answers the pile that he touched. The chadamer kol gas kula rami tamein. Now, of course, if it was tumah deraisa, it's going to spread if there's any liquid. But this is all tumah derabanan. So the shaila is how far they were geyser.
Does it go back from the Rishon?
Well, normally, mashkin automatically becomes a rishon.
Right.
But here, that's if a real tumah touched it. Here, it's not even a real tumah that touched it. It's an Amma Oretz who is tar touches it, but there's the Rabbanon that treats every Amma Oretz like a tumah.
No?
Well, what is the tumah that a Amar who would have to be a rishon, because otherwise how is he going to be matama oichel? Oichel that's chulin could only become a sheni. Truma could become a shlishi.
The oichel, but it's the
So, yeah, I understand, but it has to be a sheni. So if he touches a sheni, it comes back to being a rishon.
Right.
But he would have to have at least the status of a rishon, otherwise he wouldn't be able to be matama oichel. So I'll call upon him. The shaila is in the Rabbanon how much we're going to infect when an Amma Oretz touches it. Zok to Gemara Ulaman Damer Eshkol v'chol sevivois of Tameim, but v'chol agas kula tahira. If you hold that the tumah only stays in that bundle that he touched, but it won't spread to all the other bundles that are in, or all the clusters that are in that gas, ma'ishno mehadet nan. Why should it be different from a brisa that we had that shows that it does spread? What does the brisa say? Sheretz shenimsa verechai. A sheretz that was found in a mill, in a wheat mill, a flour mill. It's only mitama the stuff that's immediately around it. But if there was moisture and liquid in that mill, automatically it spreads through the whole mill. So by wine, there's for sure mashka around. It's a juice product, so for sure it should spread. So why is it different than the case of the Rechaim where we say it spreads? Zok Gemara, Hasam loy mifsik v'loy midi. In the case of the mill, there's flour across the whole thing. There's no separate bunches. Everything's across. Everything's spread evenly throughout the whole area. Therefore, if there's moisture, it'll automatically spread. But Hakam mifsiki ashkoilis. The fact is, there's different clusters in different areas. We don't look at it like it's all one thing. The Rabbanan paskin on behalf of Rabbi Yirmiyah, or maybe it was the son of Rabbi Yirmiyah who asked the shaila. Which is a psak lekula. Zot gemar vayt. Halokeach klitashmish min ha'ivdikacha. You're buying now Keilim from a guy. So we know there's two things that you have to do when you buy Keilim from a guy. You have to kasher to take out any beliyos in Isser, and you also have to toivel. So it depends on what you bought and how it's generally used. If there is no Isser at all involved, it just needs tevilah, then you would make tevilah. But lahagil, if it also requires hagala, then yagil. Lilabein ba'or, if it requires libun ba'or, then you labein ba'or, you'd have to put it in the fire. Hashvud via askala, which are used in direct flame. Shvud is a spit that you would put meat on, that you would suspend over a flame to roast. Askala is a grill, like a barbecue grill. Those require libun melabnon ba'or, because there the blia was done through fire, through direct fire as well. What about a socket? If you're only going to use it for cold, that's very important to point out. Shafal, you just need to scrub it, the tire, and it'll be tar. In other words, if it's only being used for cold, it's not enough just to rinse it off, because a socket is used with pressure. Therefore, to use cold, you got to scrub it. You got to scrub it with like a rough cloth, and that'll take off any of the shamnunis, so that will be matter. Zog the Heilige Gemara. Tana we learned v'chulan shrichen tefila barboimsa. All of these kelim require tefillah. When you buy something from a guy, you have to tell. Where do we know that when you buy kelim from a guy, they require tefillah? It says in the pasuk in the parsha of the Minyanim, when Klal Yisrael took all the kelim of the Minyanim, the Torah tells us, anything that was used in fire, you have to put in fire. And then the pasuk throws in an extra redundant word, v'tahar, and it will be tahar. What does that have to do with anything? Torah says, tahira acheres. The Torah is telling you, even after you kasher it, there's another tahira that's required. You have to toivel it in a mikveh. Now, there's a whole shaila. That's talking about something that required libun. Does something that you made hagala on, where do we know that also needs tevilah? So you have to say that we apply it across the board. And there's a big machlokes rishonim if tevilah's kelim is deraisa or derabanan. Is this merely an asmachta or is this a limud midaraisa? Tani bakapara taras. Mitoich shenemar b'mei nida. So let's look at the pasuk. Pasuk says, "Kol davar asher yavay ba'esh tavir ba'esh v'taher ach b'mei nida yischata." It should be clean b'mei nida. So what does that mean b'mei nida? Shaimeani shetzarech hazah shlishi ushvi. What is mei nida? Mei nida is the afer and the mayim of the paraduma. So if the pasuk references mei nida, it would be referencing the tahira of the zrika of the paraduma, which would be 2 zrikas in 7 days, the 3rd day and the 7th day. Now we know you don't need that when you buy kelim from a guy. Talmud Leimer ach. It says ach b'mei nida. So the ach says that it's not exactly, you're not exactly being retired like you would do someone who's tamei meis. So Dr. Gemara. So why does the Torah reference mei nida at all? Tomorrow it's maim shenida tevelos ben, the same type of mikvah that you would require to be mitahar nida. That's the type of mikvah that you would need to be mitahar kelim. You need 40 saw. You need a pasuk v'tar. We need v'tar to tell you toivel, and we need b'mei nida to tell you that you toivel. Because if it only had the pasuk of vitar, havamina vitar afilu kolduhu. You would think that you could toivel it even in a tiny bit of water. I feel b'mikvah chaser. Because of b'mei nida, you need 40 saw. Because of b'mei nida, havamina harav shemesh kanida. I would have thought that even after you toivel the kelim, you can't use them yet. You have to wait till night falls. Once you toivel them, you can use these kelim right away. Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rabba Baravua. Afilu kelim chadashim b'mashma. Even brand new kelim, you'd have to toivel. The Mishnah doesn't talk about brand new kelim because the Yishanim v'livnon. If you had old kelim that you made libanon, that literally restores it to brand new condition. Kechadashim davar. Nevertheless, they still need tefillah. So you see, even brand new kelim that a guy made that never were used, when you buy them, you have to tell them. Dr. Gemara Maskavlo Reb Sheshes. Ihachi afilu zuza the sar belanami. Not only would you have to toivel kelim with which you used to cook, even if you buy scissors, even any type of tool that you buy from a guy, you should have to toivel. If it's not totally in blias, if it's not totally in, if you're not linking the fact that it once had isser in it, food of isser in it, blias of isser in it, so then any type of kelim you should have to toivel. No klei suda amurim b'parsha. The only type of kelim that are being discussed in the parsha of Midyan, where it discusses the fact that you need to toivel, those are all kelim of achila. So therefore, the whole limud that we learn that you have to toivel kelim from a goy, that only applies to food items, to kelim that you prepare food with. Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rav Bar Hura, loishna ela b'lakuchin u'chamaisa shahoya. The only type of kelim that you have to toivel are kelim that you're buying, that you're keeping, such as what happened in Midian. They were taking those kelim. Aval she'ulin, but if you borrow a kelim from a goy, loy. Now this is very, very relevant, because when people make wedding in hotels, the hotel buys a whole new set of dishes because they want to make sure it's kosher, unless they have kosher dishes that are saved. Usually the hotel just buys more dishes. They use their new dishes. And you don't buy those dishes from the hotel, you just borrow them. Because if not, you would have to toivel all the dishes. But since you don't own it, therefore you don't have to toivel it.
Yes, I got it. Just a kasha. I'm not expecting a terrorist, but before they battled Midian, they battled Sichon and Og. So why don't we have the halachas then instead of at Midian?
Ooh, that's a simply pshat kasha.
Yeah, I don't
because
have.
That was after Matan Torah already. So
Yes,
it came later. How you talking?
So that's really a very curious.
And we know
problem.
they came with Matan Torah because that's one of the reasons why we eat milchiks. Because the moment we had Matan Torah, we had to catch our own kelim.
Right.
It's a good order. I don't know. So, you know where this Aval Shulin comes from? In the olden days, airlines used to serve meals with metal silver. It was metal cutlery, not cheap plastic. So I remember in my Shver's house, everybody knew Tanam was milchiks and TWA was fleishiks. So I used to tell my wife, I hope in the plane, when you steal the silverware from the airplane, you can't have in kavana to steal it before you eat your kosher meal, because then it's yours already and you have to toivel it. It has to be shu'ulin. So first eat with the silverware on the plane without having kavana to steal it, and then after you eat it, then you can decide you're going to take it home with you, because then because the moment you decide you're keeping it, so now you have to toivel it. So that's what reminds me of this Gemara always, is that when you steal silverware from the airline, make sure not to have in mind to be koinit until after you use it. Otherwise, you would have had to toivel it before you ate on the plane with it. Talk to more about Rabbi Yitzchak by Yosef, Zoven Mona the Marda me'ovet kachav. He bought a keli of Marda from the Ovet Kachavim. So let's see what he bought. Adama utzvei bakar mu'ravin. So it wasn't made out of metal. It was made out of manure and earth, some type of earthenware manure keli. And the question is, do I toivel it? I understood Rabbi Yochanan's halacha is kli matches on warm apart. The only type of kelim that require tvila are metal kelim. Amar Bashi, what about glass? Glass is not metal, but glass has properties of metal. If it breaks, you could melt it down and you could reform it. So that's similar to the properties of metal. So therefore, damu, we will consider them like matches, and you have to toivel them. Zok the Gemara weiter. Zok the Gemara weiter. Zok the Gemara weiter. V'chi nishtabru, if they, the kunya. Kunya are kelim that are not made out of metal. They're made out of offer, but they were coated with lead. They were coated with a metallic coating, so that they have a status of a metal keli that required tefillah or not. So pligabar ravacha barvina kadam kitchilasoi. The original keli before it was coated with metal is not made out of metal, and therefore does not require tefillah. The kadam kasoifoi, at the end of the day, when it's a finished product, it is metal because it's coated with metal, and therefore vehilchosah kasoif. Break the Gemara. What about mashkanta? What if a guy owes you money and he gave you his kelim as a mashkin? Do you have to toivel them? Amar Mar Baravashi, Abba, my father, Mishkin le'ovet gechavim kasa de kasa. The guy gave him as a mashkin silver goblets, and he toiveled them, and he drank. But I don't know why he did that. V'lo yodano imishum de kasovar mashkanto kizvini damya. Could be I could be pushed the shaila because my father must have held that a mashkin is like a purchase, and therefore it would require tefillah. Or imishum de chazi loiv de chavim de dati l'shkuye. Or maybe normally a mashkin is not going to be mechayiv tefillah, but my father knew that the guy was never planning to pay back, and he was planning just to abandon the silver by my father, so therefore my father considered it like he had bought it already. Tosha speaks out one thing for sure. There's a suffix by a mashkin, and therefore Tosha says if you have a mashkin, you have to toivel it, but you don't make a bracha, so toivel it with another keli that you need to toivel for sure, and that's how you make the bracha. But what about the other way around? What if you gave your keli to a goy as a mashkin? When you get it back, so Tosha you for sure do not have to toivel it. If you bought klei tashmish from a goy, if it was never used, it's brand new. You don't need any kashering. Matbilam the entire, you just toivel them. But if they were used in cold, different things that you drink out of, madichan, all you have to do is rinse them off. Umatbilam, then you can toivel them, and you can use them. What about what if they were used with hot water? Like pots, kumkumus, and water heaters, and things that you also heat up water with. Then you mag-ilan, and then umatbilan. You see, first you kasher, and then you toivel. The vorim shenishtamesh ben idea are. What about barbecue grills? Going on shvudin vaskalois. There you need malavnon umatbilan. You have to make liban, and then you toivel them. Beim toivel. The chul shenishtamesh behen. What if you use these Keilim and you didn't kasher them? You used Keilim before you toivel. You used Keilim before you kashered. Is the food mutter or aser? Tani chado, the food is aser, but Tani idach, the food is mutter, but it's not shver, loy kasher. Ha command the amr nois and tam of gam aser. The brisa that says the food is aser is hold nois and tam of gam is aser, because once the belias are in the pot for an extended period of time, like for a day, they're already bad, and therefore when they leave and go into food that you cook in it, it's nois and tam of gam, and it will be aser. But I'm sorry, the belias are still going to aser, but how come on the amr nois and tam of gam is mutter? But the Tana who holds that if you cooked in Keilim, the food is mutter, that's because they hold nois and tam of gam is mutter. Zog to Gemara Ulaman, the Amar Nois and Tam of Gam mutter. If you hold Nois and Tam of Gam is mutter, if you hold, we had this same kasha earlier in the Masechta. Why did the Torah tell you that you have to kasher the Keilim of Midian? If you hold Nois and Tam of Gam is mutter, pashas all the Keilim that you got from Midian were not used that day. And if they were not used that day, by using them, there's no issue because they don't ask for food that you cook in them. When the Torah said that you need to kasher the Keilim from Midian, that were only Keilim that happened to be used that day. But if they were not used that day, then you wouldn't have to kasher them because the lav nois and tam of gamu. Therefore, you have to kasher. So Keilim that they got to Midian should be mutter lechatchila, not the kasher, even though when they captured them, they were ben yoman. But if they didn't use them for a day, we shouldn't need any kashering. But they were forced to toivel everything onto something that would have been bashema. And the mandamar holds that nois and dam of kam is also, and even that has to be kashered. Keder bashema nami mifkam pogma. They learned that even the keder bashema is pogum if it's the blias, and therefore you learn that even that required kashering by midyan. So you see that nois and Ham Lifgam is going to answer. Okay, we will stop here and we will be Mamshech Bez Hashem tomorrow. Tomorrow we're getting really into kashering, and tomorrow is also the last daf. So Bez Hashem we'll finish the Masechta tomorrow, and there's some interesting halachas of kashering. Yeah, we'll probably be able to get a start because it's not a long daf. And so we should probably bring. I think it's Hurrios to bring
the other.
Yeah. Everyone should have an awesome Labor Day.